One of my favorite boxes back on the workbench. It's been a long time since I did a computer build video, so I'm going to use some parts I had left over and some new parts and build a new computer for my sister to use. She's still using an old socket 939 system and it's starting to be pretty flaky. But anyway, I've got a Cooler Master Elite 335 upgraded, or 335U, whichever you want to call it. And let me open this box up and get this stuff out of here real quick. Alright, got everything all unboxed, except for the case. It's still sitting down there. This was meant to be a budget build, yet still have decent performance and future proofing, so to speak. Got the Radeon 6850 1 gig DDR5. This is the Gigabyte Ultra Durable series. Another one of these 990 FXA UD3 boards, same one I'm using in my FX 8150 rig, my daily use computer. Nice motherboard. 8 gigs of G.Skill Ripjaws memory. What is this? DDR3 1600, I think. LG DVD burner. 500 gig Western Digital Caviar Black. It was a nice little upgrade. We were originally going to go with a 320 gig Caviar Blue, but it was a small price difference to go for this, so we went for the bigger one. Nice cheap basic light-on keyboard. And a nice fresh copy of Windows 7 64-bit Professional. A couple of free items that Newegg put in. Actually, an 8 gig SDHD card. It'll come in handy for this camera that I'm using right now, actually. Dirt 3 coupon and Malwarebytes. Great program, by the way. And last but not least, one of the reasons we went with the parts we did is I want to use my old Phenom 2 X4 955 CPU that was in my system. I actually took this out when I upgraded to the FX 8150. So I think this would be a nice little rig for what my sister needs to do with it anyway. So I'm going to get this case out of the box and have a look at that next. Alright, case is unboxed. It's not bad looking. Very, very shiny I/O panel there on the front. It's got a nice mesh front panel with the drive coverage being the same kind of material. Very lightweight. I wasn't expecting it to be quite that light, actually. I hope it's built well. It's got 120mm fans. It looks like a spot on the side for 120 or 140mm. Probably not going to use those. Let's see if I can get this side panel off. Alright. Power supply sits in the bottom of this case. Normally I didn't used to care for that back when that design first came around, but nowadays with the heavier power supplies it's kind of nice because it doesn't let the back of the case get bent down, you know, and plus the power supply has its own cold air intake in the bottom of the case. It actually has a little filter down there that you can take out to clean. So the power supply gets cold air right in directly and goes right out the back without having to pull the hot air from the computer through the power supply and making it even hotter before it exits the back of the case. And another nice feature, there's a cutout in the back of this motherboard mounting tray so you can access your aftermarket heatsink like this one. Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. It's just a newer version of the Hyper 212 Plus that I've used in several systems. This one's got a smoother bottom plate. I'll show more on that later. So I'm going to mount the board in here and see how well this little access panel actually works. It's got a traditional drive mounting cage setup. Lots of cables. It's just a cheapy case pretty much, but once again, like I usually do, I went for a case that had classic screw mount card slots. I can't stand those toolless ones. They never seem to hold the cards in very securely. And I wanted lots of large fans, so this thing can be nice and quiet. Kind of something between a no-frills plain case and something that's, you know, got some good looks to it at the same time. And I want to say it was around a $50 case if I remember right. But anyway, let me go ahead and get the motherboard ready to mount, get the RAM and CPU and stuff installed in there. This is something I don't see too often with off-the-shelf cases. A couple of the standoffs actually have a little flange on top that centers the motherboard on the standoff, so it keeps it in place while you put the first couple screws in, so that's pretty handy. Pretty sweet looking motherboard if I don't say so myself. All the capacitors are the solid type. No cheap electrolytics on here. I noticed they changed over to a different style mounting bracket that doesn't have the full square frame. At least I don't know how long it's been that way, because I really don't build computers all that often, and I tend to forget little details like that. But got the CPU mounted in there. I'm going to take these brackets off because I'm going to be using the aftermarket cooler anyway. So another thing I've noticed with newer motherboards these days is they come with I/O shields that only have little ground tabs sticking out. I don't know if you guys remember on the earlier ATX days where they always had these big metal tabs that stuck way out to press on the tops of these plug housings for grounding, and it made it a real pain to get the board into the case because you had to kind of angle it in there at a 45-degree angle sometimes and then push it back into those ground tabs. It's also made a danger of scratching the back of the motherboard with the case standoffs while you're trying to get it in there. So I like the more modern ones, how they still do the job, but it's much easier to get the board into the case. That wasn't so bad. This is the first case I've used in quite a while that used the finer thread screws, the same kind of thread that like a floppy drive or a CD-ROM uses. Is what was mounting the board in this case, and that's kind of unusual, at least in my experience. But I got this all in here, and it's not too bad. At first I thought the plugs weren't going to line up quite right because the board was sitting up too high, but it was just caught on the corner there and had to be lined up manually. Now it all looks good. Now I'm going to stand this back up, pull the side panel off, and see if I can get that plate mounted for that CPU cooler. Alright, here's what the CPU cooler looks like. You can see that they've definitely improved on the base quite a bit since the 212 Plus. The pipes don't have these big gaps between them anymore. It's a lot smoother. Most of the hardware looks the same as the 212 Plus. You got the little socket adapter that allows you to use a screwdriver to help tighten the standoffs. I'm probably not going to use that because I have actual nut drivers. Typical mounting plate like the other one had. But one new thing is the LGA 2011 standoffs for the new Intel socket. That's pretty much the only new thing. And they changed the fan as well. I think this one's supposed to be a little bit quieter and move a little more air. These are an extra set of fan brackets so you can run dual fans if you want. And this thing here is the actual tensioner bracket that you use to hold the heatsink down to the CPU. Darn, this chair is so noisy. This chair is probably from like the 60s or 70s. Anyway, it's kind of neat. You compress it down to fit it through, and then expand it back out to line up with the socket and tighten the screws. Very simple, but you still got to be careful when you're mounting these. It's like I was saying in a prior video, you know, any type of cooler that's got a lot of spring tension on it like that, you got to be careful not to slip and stab your motherboard with a screwdriver, because that's never good. So moving on, got to get this plate on here. That wasn't so bad. The cutout worked nice. Just had to tuck these under the edge of the metal a little bit. Got that on there nice and tight. kind of tough, but you gotta try to line those standoffs up in the center of those white circles as best you can. It won't really hurt anything if they're a little off, but I'm picky like that. I like everything to be centered and straight and perfect. So anyway, we put the Arctic Silver 5 thermal compound on that chip and get that cooler mounted. Pretty sweet looking video card. It's the first time I've seen a plastic protective connector on one of these. It's got a little cover you gotta take off. And with the power supply I'm using, I'm going to need this adapter for the PCI Express because I'm using one of those AcBell workstation power supplies. So I'll show that as soon as I get it out of the old case. But I hope the 12 volt rail is going to be big enough to run this. If not, I'm going to have to modify the power supply a bit. But I'm going to get this installed and start working on putting the drives and other stuff in. Kind of a neat screwless design on the hard drive mount. You just turn this knob, this thing pulls off, and these two metal prongs actually go into the screw holes on the drive. And it's one of the few toolless things I've seen that actually work pretty well. Too bad they don't give you very many of them, so you can't use it on all the bays. They also don't give you a lot of screws. So, in fact, I'm about out of the fine threaded type screws to hold the CD-ROM in. Probably enough to mount one more drive. And I'm going to be all out. All that's in there is mainly the coarse thread type. And I'm a little disappointed with how flimsy this case really is. There's certain times I've noticed it's pretty darn thin and a little too flexible, but so far it's going together pretty well. Jumping ahead a bit here, got everything installed, but I ran into two problems, actually a few problems. This power supply is not very well suited for this case at all. The wires that go up to the ATX connector are just barely long enough to reach, and there's only two SATA connectors on this power supply because it's an older power supply, so I had to put the DVD drive down really low and the hard drive up really high. And I just don't care for the way it looks with the DVD drive being in the bottom bay like that, so I got to pick up a Molex to SATA adapter sometime down the road so I can put that drive back up there where I had it and get the hard drive back down low, get it out of the way of the motherboard. I'm hoping that this power supply is going to run this video card okay. I think the 12 volt rail on that Molex line is only 8 amps, but the only other thing on that line is going to be the drives, so it may or may not work. I'll find out shortly. It's about time to hook this thing up and see what happens, so I got to get that computer out of the way and move this over there. Okay, everything's hooked up to the test jig. I'm going to turn the power on and hope nothing goes wrong. That's a good sign. Boy, it's weird seeing that screen on this little monitor. I'm used to doing this on my computer upstairs. Since this computer, this processor I mean, runs good at 3.52 gigahertz, I might do a mild overclock. I haven't really decided yet. I will tweak through this for a while and follow up on it a bit later. I gotta start getting Windows installed because I'm really running out of time here. Alright, Windows installation is going well so far. This thing seems pretty noisy, but it's mainly because the DVD drive is spinning and the video card fans are at full speed because the driver's not installed yet. And the power supply is not particularly quiet either. The 80mm fan. But so far so good. Everything's working on the front panel and no odd behavior yet. While that's installing over there, here's a quick look at the old piece of junk that I took the power supply out of. It's just a, I think it's an Opteron 170 dual core chip, 2 gigahertz It's got 2 gigs of RAM. I think it's a GeForce 7000 series, a 7600 or something like that. And a cheap gigabyte motherboard that had a ULI chipset on it. Worked good when it was new, but it's starting to show its age pretty bad. Samsung SATA hard drive, very early SATA. That, from what I was told, actually it's an IDE drive with a SATA bridge built onto it. And a pair of beige colored DVD drives. Such a junky case. I think this case actually takes the cake for crappiest case I've ever used. It had one of those stupid brackets that held the cards in place, you know, kind of a somewhat toolless design, but it never did work right, and I ended up having to put screws through the metal anyways, and then put nuts on the back because this is like pop can metal. It's so thin, and the 80mm fans in the back were really noisy. There's nothing I could really do about it because it would overheat if I slowed them down any more than they were. Speaking of fans, I still got to add another fan to the front of this case to cool the hard drive off, but I got to get everything up and running, and I'll take care of that later.